Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jenna Brown.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. Kevin, you were rambling about some kind of AI voice, something or other. I just figured I better hit record and capture whatever this is.
This got tapped on, so it's not part of the official news, but 11 Labs announced via Twitter today, or X, that they just launched their iOS app. So I went and downloaded that and played with it. They said, their tweet said, it lets you listen to any article, book, or doc using our AI-generated voices. I have my voice programmed in as one I was going to use for audiobooks and things. And so today I downloaded it and it let me upload one of my books to the app, and then I played it in my voice. So it was actually it's pretty well done. I mean, it's got some intonation issues, but it does pretty well. So that's pretty exciting, I think. I'm going to steal other voices to use on, have Yoda reading my text messages and things like that.
I've heard a couple of these, and they're pretty good. Like you said, it's the emotional inflection that's missing. But like if it's just reading straight text, it's like a nonfiction, whatever. You really can't tell, or you can barely tell, and you got to be listening for it, I think, to pick up on it. I'm wondering, like, I start my morning every day. I sit down at my desk and I say I don't want to say the word Alexa really loud because it's going to start beeping behind me. But I ask her what my news briefing is, and I have a couple of different news channels programmed in, and it'll just give me the headlines from those different news channels every day. And it's an actual reporter, reading these things off. And like, I could see that guy losing his job, like in another month with something like this. And I imagine they're going to have to license it, right? Because like if you use the news app on your phone, like you can't just play like any news story. It's got to be run through this, I'm guessing. Or
so I've only just started to play with it, but the demo that they showed was, the guy getting in his car, and he has it read off the news, some news article someone sent him or something like that. So okay. I don't know how they're going to handle things. I predicted that this was going to happen, by the way, just putting it out there. But what's interesting to me, I can almost hear the complaints already from people who are going to get, the people who are going to claim that this is violating copyright, and creating audiobooks that burn them out of their audiobook rights or something. I can already hear that coming, but I, for one, am very excited about it.
I'm going to have to check that out. It seems like everything's getting smarter. I just bought smart sprinklers for my yard.
Yeah.
And I bought it just because, I was scrolling one of the social media networks. I don't remember which one, but all of a sudden these things just start popping up. So obviously it knows what I like to buy. But I set it up in the backyard, and you basically, you plug a hose into it. Then you use an app on your phone to map out the shape of your yard. And then it waters it. You can tell it to put 1/8 of an inch of water, 1/4 inch of water, or whatever. And it hits every single spot that you tell it to. It doesn't hit the sidewalks in any place that doesn't need to get watered. But what's really cool about it is it can like spot water plants. So if you have plants that are potted, like just sitting around your yard, it can shoot like a stream of water, like over everything else, and just nail that plant.
Nice.
Which is crazy. I mean, it's fun to watch, but it's like, like sprinklers are getting smart. Like everything is getting smart around us. I think people need to get a little bit smarter.
I don't know how big a fan I am of that, though. Like, because in our house we have almost every appliance we have is technically a smart appliance, and that's fine for the most part. But like, really, do I really need my clothes dryer to be on the internet? Like, is that something I needed?
No, and they can use that to like.
I write an entire series based on that idea. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not very comfortable with all that smart technology. Like, I am more likely to buy a non-smart appliance. Like, that's not a selling feature for me.
And for those listening, that would be an appliance with no glasses. Take the glasses off of that appliance, and it's no longer a smart appliance.
Right. Yeah.
That's a callback to before the show.
So I don't know, if I can access it from anywhere, then anyone can access it from anywhere. And I just, they can like access your Wi-Fi at that point. And I don't know. I'm not very comfortable with it. I don't like the idea of it.
So Jen is going to go live in a cabin in the woods somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, It's worrisome.
I embrace it. Like I love being able to turn on the oven while I'm still in the car on my way home, to preheat it. Silly stuff like that. I like the dryer knowing what, like I get a little notification on my watch. It tells me when the clothes are dry. Because if I don't get that, like those clothes will sit in that dryer for like 3 days and I'll be like, didn't I start laundry at some point? And, like I will forget this stuff. So people are getting dumber. Everything else around us is getting smarter.
It has its benefits, but I guess, I don't know. I just think like cybersecurity, I think, is going to be like one of the biggest industries of the future. And I think this is exactly why, because, you're opening your entire inner world to someone who can access it. And I just think there's a lot of risk there.
But what are they going to do? Are they going to finish my laundry for me when they hack into the dryer?
Well, no, but they can access your, so once they can get in, like if they can get into your dryer and connect to that thing, they can actually get into your Wi-Fi, which then can access your other devices. So your laptops and your computers and your phones and anything that's connected to that Wi-Fi system. And so in theory, they could get access to passwords and, anything that's on your hard drives. Like it can be very problematic.
JD, didn't you write a book about this? Are you not taking your own advice?
I did, and that's why I'm bringing it up, because like every like I've heard some of these things before, and like in my house, like if something joins our Wi-Fi, like I get a notification. Like if it's not a known device, so if somebody pulls up in their car and they've never been at our house before, and they, log into our Wi-Fi, because there's like, we've got a QR code that they can scan to get in. Like I'll know. So like, and if a device were to somehow connect, I'm guessing if it were to hack in, I would still get some type of notification from the same things. Who knows? I don't think my life is interesting enough to hack in here, but I guess if they could get to the hard drive, they'd find some juicy material.
Get that latest J.D. Barker books early.
Hopefully they edit while they're in that book.
I don't think it notifies. It's not the same as like they're going in through back doors and back channels, and so like it's you'd have to have like security on your modem, which I don't think like the average person necessarily understands. It's like I know people get really upset at Apple because like you have to use authorized chargers, because even chargers can come with spyware on them. So, you buy a cheap throwaway charger, or you plug in at an airport, for example. Someone can have spyware in that cable that now is connected to your phone that can now spread through all your devices to every network that you connect to. So it is actually quite terrifying.
Well, what I do, and here's a pro tip, because I used to run a computer network back when I was with that brokerage firm. So the Wi-Fi coming into my house, it's a fiber network. So I've got the router and the modem coming in from there. That's broadcasting a Wi-Fi signal. I don't actually use that Wi-Fi signal for anything. So if somebody were to pull up to my house in their car and they don't know who I am, and look at the nearest Wi-Fi, that's the one they're actually going to see. The one in my house is a mesh network, which is completely separate, and it's hardwired into that modem. And I don't broadcast the name of the wireless network, so you can actually turn that off. So you can log into it, but in order to log into it, then you need to know the Wi-Fi name and the password. Otherwise, it's basically invisible. So I think to a certain extent that protects me. Who knows? I mean, there's always for everything, there's always a hack around it, and then there's a hack to fix that, and it just becomes who's more determined and who's more lazy, and then eventually somebody wins out.
Right.
That's true.
And I am more lazy.
Yeah. All right. What's in the news?
Agent fired by KT Literary over Twitter posts. This one comes with screenshots. I grabbed a couple of screenshots I'm going to reference. So hold on to your hats. But Hillary Harwell, an agent at KT Literary, was fired following a Twitter controversy where she publicly posted about a query she received suggesting another author write a book that was presented to her. The post sparked backlash on Twitter, with many noting it was inappropriate for an agent to solicit another writer to develop a concept from a query she had rejected. KT Literary announced Harwell's dismissal, stating that her actions contradicted the agency's values and the trust they build with their clients. Harwell expressed deep regret over her post, acknowledging it was hurtful to aspiring authors, clients, and colleagues. and took full responsibility for the fallout. The tweet, by the way, I'm going to read it to you. It says, just read a query that was essentially The Road Meets Deliverance, #YA, and now I want someone to write this for me, please. My first question is, you want a YA book that is The Road Meets Deliverance? I find that more problematic than the fact that she was trying to solicit someone to write the book.
You know, I don't know. I have always felt when I see, because I have seen this before where an agent will be like, oh, just dreaming of this comp to land in my inbox. And, inevitably there's always a comment that's like, yeah, I sent that to you and you rejected it. So I feel like agents probably do this. They just don't say the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. I mean, again, give 10 writers the same comps. They're going to come up with wildly different books, but it does feel very icky.
In that thread for that tweet, someone asked, well, like, aren't you going to ask the querier to do this? And she said, no, the author did not pitch it as such, meaning as Deliverance Meets the Road, nor was the opening strong enough. And my question to that would be, why wouldn't you then work with that? If that's the book you wanted,
right?
Why not work with the author that pitched it to see if you can maybe refine that idea? Or you could do the Hollywood thing and say, look, I don't think you're strong enough for this, but maybe we can cut you in on getting this other person to do it, or something along those lines. But that's not how this went down. So it's pretty sketchy.
There is like a weird thing too, I have noticed as a querying writer. And as I've talked to other authors who have been in the industry a lot longer than I have even been attempting to be in the industry, that agents did kind of used to do that. Like they would spot a good idea or talent and even revise and resubmit. Hey, I like what you've got here. It needs to be stronger. I would like it aimed in this direction. You produce that for me, come back. And it seems like more and more they just want like submission ready as a debut. And if it's not that, they would just rather tweet for someone else to give it a go. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I used to, make a pretty decent living rewriting stuff like this. Like I would get a call from an agent who, they got this book, it landed on their desk. They liked it, but it needed work. They would go back to the author. The author wasn't capable of making whatever changes were necessary to get it to a publishable state. So they would hire me to come in and fix them. And publishers used to do that too. I used to get calls from editors where they would buy a book and the editor, they would work with the author and they couldn't get it done. So they would bring me in to tweak it. Back in the day, they had the flexibility to do that. I think on the agent standpoint, they didn't get anywhere near the number of submissions that they get in today's world, with email and everything. Because a lot of this was back when things were still physically mailed. So there just weren't that many submissions coming in. So they were able to tweak something and work with it when they saw that it had potential. And an editor had the budget for it. So an editor was allowed to buy something that they felt needed some work. They could spend time on it. They could spend money on it, and they could get it to the point where it was publishable. But today's world, we've got, agents are getting inundated with queries. There's plenty of material out there. Editors are in the same boat. Prices are the money that's being spent is getting cut left and right on the budget side. So they just can't do that. Everybody does need a perfect book, I think, to land on their desk. That agent does, the editor does, and there's just no more wiggle room anymore like there used to be.
Yeah. Next up, here's a first, some actual Amazon book sales data. Business Insider obtained a confidential 25-page report revealing internal sales data from Amazon's book retailing business for the first 10 months of 2022. The report shows Amazon's book category recorded $16.9 billion in gross merchandise sales worldwide, with $9.5 billion from the U.S., including $7.4 billion from print books and about $2 billion from ebooks. Amazon's print book sales comprised roughly 77% of BookScan reported sales. Data
is huge. I just saw another report where print sales for last year were up quite a bit. So book sales in general seem to be doing better than people expected.
Yeah. This data is from 2022. I wonder how useful that actually is now, though. Like
not a whole lot.
2 years
I don't
later.
know. I did think it was funny that they said actually, like here's some actual data.
Yeah. They hacked into the clothes dryer of Jeff Bezos, and
Yes.
from there they were able to get the data.
Correct.
Next up, Target taps Shopify to add sellers to its third-party marketplace. Target has partnered with Shopify to add new and trendier brands to its website through the Target Plus marketplace, allowing Shopify's smaller and up-and-coming brands to apply to join. This collaboration aims to discover popular items quickly and potentially make them available in Target stores, enhancing Target's online and in-store offerings. Third-party marketplaces are seen as profitable because they rely on sellers to store, pack, and ship their goods, reducing financial risk for the retailer. Now, this is interesting, by the way, for two things. One, this is a chip that Joanna Penn and some others have been placing on Shopify. This could potentially make their books and other items that they sell direct through that storefront available through this major retailer. But the other thing that I think is kind of interesting is I was just watching a video about the rise of YouTube as the number one streaming service, and one of the things they attribute their success to is creator-based content, and this is essentially the same concept. Like you've got this marketplace that is all creator based, and someone, Target now, has identified this as a potential like windfall. So I think you're going to see more of this kind of thing happening. Walmart did something similar with some partners, but they're Walmart, so they screwed it all up. But I think you're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing happen. It'll be a good competition for Amazon too.
Well, it's been happening on Amazon, right? They've got third-party sellers out there, and they've had that for a long time. What I'm curious about, and I didn't have time to research this, do any of you know if like Ingram Spark titles, do they appear at Target, like in like at Target.com?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out if there's another path for indie authors to actually get into a store like Target. Like my books are, the trad world, so like they're all in Target, but I'm wondering if through, and obviously Amazon's not going to list on Target. But I'm guessing that Ingram probably does, or possibly through Baker and Taylor. I mean, this is good in a lot of ways. Like they didn't specifically call out books, but I think that's going to, get a lot more books, a lot more visibility. And if this works with Target, this isn't an exclusive thing. So Shopify can sign a similar deal with Walmart. They could do one with Costco. They could do one with a lot of different retailers that just want to add, 100, 200, or 1,000 stores, worth of products to their search database, basically to solidify the one shop shopping experience, I guess. You go to one search bar and you can kind of find everything you want, which is what Amazon's got now. So I think it's great for competition. And, I think Joanna's right. The direct sales market, like if you can get into this, if Shopify is doing this now with Target, this is just going to solidify all that.
Very good. That's it for the news. When you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show. JD, who we got up today?
This week we've got Snowden Wright. Snowden has a BA from Dartmouth and previously worked for Salon Esquire, The Atlantic, and the New York Daily News. His latest novel is called The Queen City Detective Agency, and it releases August 13th. Snowden Wright.
All right. Joining me now, Snowden. Hey.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, and it's good to chat with you. I'm looking forward to this. You first of all, you have one of the Yeah, I'm always envious of people who have names that indicate the career they're going to have. Snowden Wright. I don't know what a Tomlinson is out in the world, like what a Tomlinson does, but I didn't get lucky and get named Wright. So congratulations on that.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was all my choice.
Now, we're going to chat about your new book coming up, but I want to kind of dig into like your history and how you got into all this. You're the author of several books, and you write for a lot of known publications like the Atlantic and Salon and Esquire, and you've got quite a little list of credentials.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's something you must work at. I am guessing.
I worked at it a lot more when I was first beginning out and trying to get my foot into the door. And now that I write novels full time, have a lot less time for pursuing non-novel writing.
Yeah. Novels take that. People may not realize this. They take time. It takes time to write a novel. Yeah, good. So let's talk about how you got into this then. Did you start off was writing for these publications sort of your primary goal, or did you always dream of being a novelist?
I always dreamed of being a novelist. Where I grew up in Mississippi, and in my small hometown, we didn't even have a bookstore. So on weekends, my father would take me into Jackson, Mississippi, which is about an hour and a half away from Meridian, where I grew up. And Jackson did have a bookstore, a very well-known one called Lemuria. And so back in those days, Lemuria is on the second floor of this building. And on the first floor, there was this sports bar. And so on Saturdays, my father would take me there and he'd give me a $20 bill and send me upstairs to Lemuria while he stayed downstairs and watched the game and had a couple scotches. And I would put down stakes in that bookstore. I would spend hours there looking for just the right book. And I like to say that I have two things to thank for the fact that I'm a writer: Lemuria books and Johnny Walker Black.
Perfect. Coincidentally, those are also my my two pieces of origin. Man, that sounds like heaven, actually. I need to find this. Is it still around, Lemuria?
It is still around.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll be doing a reading there in August for this book.
And is there still a sports bar downstairs?
No, now it's a little deli.
Well, so close. Delis. Everyone likes a good sandwich. So that does explain some things, by the way, you being from Mississippi, because your work, at least this current novel, is set in Mississippi. Is all your work set in Mississippi?
So far, yes, although the first two books went outside of Mississippi. American Pop, my second novel, took place primarily here, but it went all over the country and really all over the world. It took me all the way to France in the 1930s, New York in the 40s and 50s. It took me everywhere. And even the first book, which was primarily set in Mississippi, that even ventured outside of the state a little bit. But this one's the first one that sticks to Mississippi.
Yeah. And you range through eras, which is always fun. Is that is that a big draw for you? Or do you consider yourself sort of I don't know if you'd is that like a period writing kind of thing? Is that what you would call that?
You could call it historical fiction.
Historical
I think definitely
fiction.
my first two would fall under that purview. This latest one, it's primarily, I think it would be considered a crime novel, but it is technically historical. It takes place in the 80s. So I think of that decade as recent because I was born in it, but I mean, it was 40 years ago. So a while back.
Don't hurt me like that. That is, that's my, that's when I was walking around pretending to be an adult. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I love the title, by the way, the Queen City Detective Agency.
Thank you.
Where's the name come from? I know you explained it on your website, but let's get
the name. Meridian, Mississippi, my hometown, is known as the Queen City because for a while it was the number 2 city in the state. It was even the capital for a short period of time. It was proposed to be the capital for a while, but it has since fallen off that throne and is now, I believe, like 8th, 9th, 10th. But it still has that nickname to it. And so when I was coming up with the name for the book, I went through a lot of different choices. But the one that I ultimately decided on was the Queen City Detective Agency. It gives you a sense of what the book is about.
Yeah.
and it has some intrigue to it. You want to figure out what's the story behind that name.
Yeah. It's got a good rhythm too, man. I mean, I don't
Yes.
think people think about that much, but a title needs that rhythm. It needs to be something that you want to say.
Yeah. My working title for the book was Mississippi Goddamn, after
Yeah.
the Nina Simone song. There is a chapter in the book named that. But with the advice of my editor, she advised that curse words in a title can lose from some readers there. And so we ultimately
It's true.
decided to go with something a bit more straightforward
That's true, but
and
you
PG.
you should have that as a kind of maybe somewhere like in an internal page. It's like the secret subtitle of the book. I like it. I think. So 1980s Mississippi, man. How was that different from the rest of the world? I have only Texas as my point of reference for
Why?
1980s.
I think 80s in Texas is probably similar to 80s in Mississippi.
Yeah.
There were a lot of the social issues that unfortunately we still have today.
Yeah.
But because it was in that era, there was a lot less progressive, especially in Mississippi. It allowed me to dig in deeper to them, to the racism, the sexism, all the isms we had going on
Yeah.
back then. And also on a practical note, as a crime novel and a novel about a detective investigating a mystery, not having cell phones, not having the internet makes it a lot easier to
Yeah.
tease out the plot and the mystery. Because if you have a cell phone and you have the internet, you can solve a mystery a lot quicker than you could back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about quicker, but
Yeah.
you get a few more advantages. Yeah, I'm baffled at how I managed to survive the 80s and 90s as a driver alone. Like,
Mhm.
how did I get anywhere? I have no recollection of ever. I know I used maps. I had to, but
Mhm.
I'm like, how did I understand what I was looking at?
I can't even get to my
Now,
own dentist without doing Waze.
right. I use GPS to get to places that I've literally been to 100 times. So yeah, that okay, yeah. So the 80s makes a great setting for this kind of thing. What's the sort of rundown of the plot itself for the book?
The plot began with a true story. Back in the 80s, my father was the district attorney in
Mhm.
Meridian. And so he was prosecuting this case in which a wealthy real estate developer had been murdered. And the prime suspect was an illustrious criminal by the name of Peanut Griffin. And Peanut was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. One
Yeah,
day he decided that he didn't want to be in jail anymore. And so he broke out of the county courthouse, having forgotten that the county courthouse was located on the roof. He broke out of the county jail, having forgotten that the county jail was located on the roof of the county courthouse. So he's on the top of this building in his boxer shorts and his bathrobe with nowhere to run. And while he was up there, he was threatening to kill not only my father, but my mother and myself. And it became a story of dinner table family lore.
yeah.
You never forget your first death threat. And I was fortunate to have survived mine at the age of 2. My sister likes to brag because my mother was pregnant with her at the time that she survived hers before she was even born. And it that was really the jumping off point for the book. And then I took it into a lot more fictional venues than what really happened with the true story. It took me to all kinds of places, including illegal cockfights, the Dixie Mafia.
Yeah.
Meridian, Mississippi, in a lot of ways, was like the Wild West. When I hear stories from my father about what it was like, it was kind of amazing to think that it was that much of a lawless place and that he was essentially the sheriff. And
Yeah.
so hearing those stories at the dinner table, crime was just, it was the weather. It was as omnipresent as the air.
Yeah.
And so I joke that it's like a fantasy off there having grown up in Middle Earth.
Right. Right. I was going to ask like how influential was that? And it had to be on your career. So
Absolutely,
you
yeah.
definitely leaned in.
hmm There was even my dad would tell stories, and one was about this dive bar in Meridian called the John Wesley Hardin Club. And so it was named after the deadliest gunfighter
Yeah.
in the West.
Yeah.
And the story that my father likes to tell is they only went there one time, And as he was walking in the door, the woman who was working the door, she stopped him and she said, "Sir, are you armed?" And my dad said, "No." She reaches in a drawer, pulls out a handgun, gives it to him, and goes, "You can borrow this one. I think I'll use it."
That's beautiful. Man, that's great. So okay, and it's funny because a lot of writers, especially thriller writers, started off as attorneys. It was sort of like you didn't have to go that route per se, but you get all the benefit of that. Behind every good storyteller is a good story, they say.
That's true. And so I got all the benefit without having to go to law school.
Yeah, exactly. Came out better for that financially for sure. So let's talk about what I'm always interested in, like the history and the process and the things that people go through as they are writing. What's a sort of typical writing day for Snowden Wright?
Ever since the release of my second novel, I've been writing full time. That novel enabled me to quit my day job. I had been living in Atlanta, working at Georgia Tech as a grant administrator, and then with that book deal and the one for Queen City, I was very fortunate to be able to support myself full time as a writer. And so now my schedule is a lot looser. I make it myself. I typically write in the morning, and I'm a big runner. And so what I like to do is write until I reach a point in the narrative where either a sentence doesn't sing, some transition feels clunky, there's a character development I haven't figured out. And so that's when I go for a run. And while I'm doing that, I work it out in my head.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's as simple as rewriting a sentence over and over again, or just trying to figure out that plot turn, how I could twist it so that it works in the narrative.
Yeah. Do you aim for like a certain number of words per day, or how do you keep the train going?
With this book, I did because I was on deadline. And
Hmm.
so my actual word count that I have per week is much smaller than I think people would expect. It's 1,500 words per week.
Hmm.
If I'm fortunate enough to be at a writing residency, I'll up that to 2,000. But the thing is, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to sentences. So once I get those 1,500 words, they're not going to need a lot of editing. They're
Yeah.
exactly the way I want them. Which is
Yeah.
not to say that I won't change them later or my editor won't have input, but they're clean, they're submittable at that point, and so they're good to go. And so
Right.
those 1,500 words, it might be similar to like 5,000 words for a different type of author.
Because it's gone through the actual sort of all that process, like someone like me has to do rewrites and things like that. You're sort of doing that as you go. So you
As I go. So
yeah.
it's like ironing. I'm kind of moving
Yeah.
forward and then moving back and then moving forward.
I don't think I'd survive that kind of process, man. I mean, the I can't aim for perfect sentences right out of the gate, or I will never finish what I'm doing. How do you keep going? How do you make sure you're still going?
I mean, that's totally fine and that's understandable and that's how most people do it.
Yeah.
I like to do it this way because the sentences lock together so much, so they have so exactly that if I go back and had to change something later on, it has a ripple effect where
Yeah.
I will have to change the sentence before and after that, and then the sentence before and after those.
Hmm.
I think that the not only the content but the structure of sentence A dictates the content and structure of sentence B.
Yeah.
And so I really think along those lines and think about syntax very hard and try to write the most elegant and the strictest meaning of that term, the most elegant sentence possible, where if I can do in one sentence what other writers would take them a paragraph, that's what I'm going for.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want you to be able to bounce a quarter off these sentences.
Yeah, yeah. So I assume then that based on that you are an outliner, that you pin everything down first.
Not really.
Really?
Right. Yeah. With the plot, I really tried to have it arise organically from
Okay.
character. And sometimes a character will just have a walk-on part. And then I might have a chapter from their point of view, and I'll explore them in more depth and realize, oh, wait, there's more to this person than I at first thought.
Yeah.
They're more involved with the plot, and that leads to the narrative machinations. And so I had a general idea of where the book was going, but I didn't know exactly how to get there. And it's really the characters that led me there.
Wow. that's I'm floored, man, because I'm a pantser. I mean, I don't outline, but I mean, I also don't try to get it perfect the first time out. So that's
Doing it that way, I had to go back and make some changes. And
I guess what my next question should be is like, what medications are you on? Because you, I would be stressed out. So
yeah, it gets stressful in later drafts
yeah,
when there was a one big narrative turn that my editor insisted just did not make sense. And
yeah,
so I kept trying to figure it out. And finally, I think I got it right. And she was happy with it. And I was happy that she kept pushing me on it.
yeah. Excellent. So what's a typical turnaround time then for your draft?
For this book, this is pretty much my shortest turnaround time. I wrote the first draft in a year,
Okay.
essentially. And then for the second draft, I think 2 months, and then another month for smaller copy edit type things.
Yeah.
So less than a year and a half. Usually, so with American Pop, my second novel, that took 2 to 3 years to write that. And it was much more in-depth rewrite process.
Hmm.
Whereas this one is a shorter book and a lot less characters, so it was easier for the
Yeah.
rewrite, but it wasn't easy. Let's put it that way.
You're right. Yeah. Easy. That's a myth.
Mhm.
Since you write, I guess we're gonna call these. I mean, I'm not disparaging or anything, but I'm saying historical historical fiction.
Sure.
And because I don't know a better, I mean, it has to be that, right? Because you are going into these other eras. It's just so when I think of the 80s, my brain won't let me call that historical fiction.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
That's the only hang up for me. So when you're doing this, I mean, how are you handling things like research and making sure you're getting those details right? The 80s, I think, might not be quite as hard because we were in them, but
Correct.
going elsewhere, and especially if it's somewhere like, outside of your where you grew up or whatever, like how are you getting those details right?
Well, that's where having smartphones really is advantageous. So if I need to know really quickly what the most popular car in 1985 was, I can Google that pretty easily.
Yeah.
Or say in 1932. That makes it a lot easier than it would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And as you said, in the 80s, we lived through it. And so I had I would keep a list of reference points that I might want to put in there, Teddy Ruxpin, Rubik's Cube, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. You never want to overdo it, especially with the 80s,
Yeah.
because it can be so fun to put those points in there. A lot of writers might get overzealous. So I tried to have a light touch when it came to that, and also try to make all those reference points, if I put them in, somehow illuminating the character.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one time in writing American Pop, and there was a section back in this was set 100 years ago. And so there, at the time, I discovered that phone numbers, they were 5 digits, I believe. And so a lot of people would create a word out of that. So 5 brick.
Yeah.
And I had a character, he would make up his own words depending on who he was calling. So when he called his mother, he would dial 5 dread. So we get to know how he feels about this person in his life. And that's my favorite kind of historical detail, when you
Yeah.
can use it to illuminate character.
Yes, that's actually handy. Maybe that's something I need to consider. My stuff is mostly contemporary, but I could leverage that. That's a good trick. Uh, so when you're doing all this, are you like doing a lot of reading? I mean, I know you're using your smartphone and you're going online, but are you stacking up books about this stuff? Or you?
I do reading. I like to read a lot of novels that are set in the genre I'm writing,
Yeah,
but I'll also like to be omnivorous when it comes to that. I think there's a lot you can learn
yeah.
from books that are outside of your particular genre. So with this one, I did read a lot of crime novels, a lot of detective novels to get the lingo
I
down.
hadn't really thought about that. An interesting approach to that because like I tend to lean towards nonfiction when I'm researching, but
All
it
right.
seems like it would be useful and important to read the fiction because the things they're gonna mention and focus on. Like when you read like a history of that era, they're mostly looking at like, they're looking at it from now. And so the stuff they notice is, the unusual things or the things that maybe people didn't talk about day to day. But when you're writing a novel, yeah,
Right.
that's interesting.
So think about if you're writing a car chase. Some people might say, "Well, watch The French Connection. It has a really great car chase."
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot you can learn from doing that, but you can learn just as much from watching Battleship Potemkin and
Yeah.
the rhythm of the editing there. And I think one of my favorite books that I learned from about creating a mystery was Shirley Hazard's The Transit of Venus.
Mm.
In that book, she uses flash forwards a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she uses it in very subtle ways. And there was even this one instance where this dentist that a character went to for a chipped tooth, the dentist was only there for maybe a page,
Yeah.
and she did a flash forward to tell us how this guy would die years later. And I wondered, why would she do that? And then towards the end of the book, when I realized why, it 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 took my breath away almost, because I realized what the trick she had pulled. And I
Yeah.
love that sort of device. And that's very much a literary novel. That's not in any way a crime novel. And yet I was able to learn something valuable from it.
That's excellent, man. That's when you're doing that, are you how do you picture the reader when it comes to this sort of thing? Like, are you trying to fool the reader, surprise the reader with what you're writing? Just carry them along.
One of my first readers is also a writer, Matt Burgess. And so
Mm.
when I sent him the book to take a look at, he gave me some feedback, and one note he had was, "Oh, I figured out who did it before the end." And I said, "I'm totally fine with that, because I
Yeah.
want to leave enough clues that an astute reader could figure it out.
Right.
Ideally, not every reader would, but a few will, and I'm happy with that because that means I did my job."
Because they'll stick around to confirm. Like it's not like they figure it out and then they toss the book and they're done. Like they want
Right,
to make sure they're right. That's the part that's actually important, right?
right. And one of the cardinal rules is, say it's a who done it,
Yeah.
and the guy who done it shows up in the last two chapters. You didn't do your job there, because there's no way for the reader to figure that out. If it's just someone who shows up on the last few pages.
Yeah.
It has to be, they have to be introduced. I think I forget which writer had a list of 10 rules, but one of his rules was within the first four chapters, the person
Yeah.
who did it has to be introduced at that point, so that we get enough time with the person who did it and we are allowed enough clues to figure it out.
Yeah.
And if we don't have those, it's an unsatisfying reading experience.
Yeah, it's like the inverse of Chekhov's gun. You're introducing that person. Yeah. Not
Hmm.
not so that you're going, it's not like the gun where you have to use that at some point. That's not the hint. It's more like here's this character so that we have them in mind as we're reading. That's cool.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So excellent, man. So you got this one. When is this book coming out, by the way?
August 13th.
August 13th. So we got some time. They got pre-orders coming. What's next then? Are you working on the next one already?
I am, actually. I would love to make this a series with the same protagonist.
Yeah. It sounds like a series. It's got
Well,
that
thank
vibe.
you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually value series with the same protagonist. So the next book, if it goes according to plan, I want to jump ahead a few years and take aim at the 90s. So it takes place in 1991
Okay.
in Florida. And so we're getting out of Mississippi, and it's been fun figuring out what the plot of that one will be. Is kind of, I see it as my protagonist takes a vacation and gets wrapped up into a plot down there, and it allows me
Yeah.
to use some of my favorite neo noirs as
Mhm.
inspiration. Body Heat, Night
Yeah.
Moves, Against All Odds. Some really great movies from the 80s and 90s are
Yeah.
really formative for me as a person and as a storyteller, and for this book.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, by the way? Why were there so many movies like that set in Florida in the 90s?
It was just so hot down there.
I guess so. You got nothing. Yeah, you're nothing to do but sweat and murder each other, I guess, is the
That happens on the Redneck Riviera.
Yeah, exactly right, man. Yeah, you're not going to run out of material. How much inspiration do you take? Because this, you said, was inspired by true events that were actually part of your family history.
Mhm.
How much inspiration are you taking from, actual historical events when you write these things?
Actual historical events, they are in the background. So,
Hmm.
Queen City is taking place over the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to Reagan's re-inauguration for a second
Yeah,
term. And so that really gave me a ticking clock for the book, and it allowed that to be that backdrop and all the issues going on with his presidency and social issues in the country at large.
yeah,
With this book that I'm working on now, it's set on the Florida Panhandle, and I have a lot of experience down there. My family would vacation there when I was a kid growing up, and also I took as the inciting incident, this one case that my father told me about that he prosecuted back when he was DA. And I kind of like the idea of having each book have that origin story, some
yeah,
case he tried. It's a bit of a surprise how it goes, so I won't explain it here. But he'll have to keep telling me stories so I can keep
yeah,
writing.
yeah. So these kind of like an homage to your dad.
That the initial incidents are. I
Yeah,
wouldn't say that all the books there are. And there's with the district attorney in Queen City. I had to rename him, of course, which broke his heart. He wanted to have his own name in there, but you
yeah,
could see them as a nod to his career and the. I grew up in a storytelling family,
yeah,
so and he was a big part of that. And so yes, in that sense, you could see it as an homage to him.
yeah. That's excellent, man. Well, as we get closer to wrapping up, a question we're trying to ask folks. I'm real curious to hear your answer. So let's say you're talking to a young Snowden, right? The next generation Snowden, right? Next one coming up. What is the advice that you wish you'd gotten, or that you valued most when you did get it, that you'd want to pass along to up and comers?
My advice to any aspiring writer would be to remember to tell a story. You would be shocked how often writers I've seen, writers I knew, the writer I was,
Yeah,
forget to tell stories. And
yeah,
here we were just sitting there, we're trying to write short stories and novels, and we forget that one vital aspect of it. I would spend 2 pages describing a rug in the middle of a room.
yeah,
You should be pushing the plot forward. And so plot may be 4 letters, but it's not a 4 letter word. You
yeah.
should embrace it. And it's your job as a writer to value all aspects of writing, and plot is very much one of those. And so remember to tell a story.
Okay. And what's the secret to plot? What's your top tip on plot?
Hmm. Well, that's a tough one. I advise to get more granular on it. I advise young writers to write in third person and past tense.
Mm,
And what those gently nudge writers into doing is to tell a story. It puts them in storyteller mode, the same as starting a story with Once Upon a Time,
yeah.
which puts you into fairy tale mode. Something's going to happen when you start that way. And writing in third person pushes them out of their own eye,
Yeah.
and it allows them to think of characters outside of their own experience. A lot of early stories are very autobiographical, which is fine, is a part of the growth of the writer. But it's always great when you see a young writer really start to utilize their imagination and build
Yeah.
characters and worlds.
Excellent. All right. Well, Mr. Snowden, right, where can people find you online?
My website is snowdenwright.com. Twitter handle is @snowdenwright. Those are the primary places to find me.
Excellent. I'm good to see. I'm glad. And I notice you have a Substack too. I'm a big fan of Substack.
Oh, yes, yes. I just started that, so I'm getting my feet wet with that whole
Yeah.
project. Yeah.
Excellent. Good deal. All right. And the book is The Queen City Detective Agency, available August 13th, 2024. So rush right on out and pre-order that right now. And thank you, Snowden, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So my first question to you guys, the peanut gallery here, is have you remembered to tell a story? Because I keep forgetting.
Yes. That's actually something I always try to remind myself, like when I'm like drafting, but particularly when I'm editing, like, does this scene tie directly to the plot? Like, and I think I read, oh, I don't know where, a long time ago when I was first starting, something that said like, you can get rid of info dumping by like a paragraph shouldn't be like sort of standalone for the world. It should be like a sentence or two that are directly tied to the scene. So I try to do that, like just to kind of like, is this side plot relevant and does it come back to the main plot in some way or the character arc? But yes, I try. I really try.
I try to weave those kind of things in. Right now, I'm going through basically my second pass on a first draft, and one of those threads just didn't work. So I started it in the book, and it got maybe a third of the way through the book, and then I realized it's not working, so I stopped it. And the rest of the book kind of flowed the way it was supposed to. But now I'm going back through, and I'm having to edit out that particular thread, which I always find to be a pain in the ass because like when I read it, at the beginning, like it does feel like it's working, so it's like woven in there pretty tight. And then it sort of peters out, I guess, as time goes on. But in those initial chapters, it just creates a lot of extra work. But I do think that process is worthwhile because if you don't try it, you're not going to stumble into the few that do work. And more often than not, I think it does work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like a layered story too, like when I'm reading it. So I really like it when everything is very clearly, things make sense. By the time you get to the end, it's sort of like there is a whole like, oh, that was it all tied together. And even if it doesn't like necessarily, maybe it's a red herring, but still it makes sense. You're not like wondering after the book is done, like, I wonder why we needed 3 chapters on so-and-so's aunt, like it doesn't make
My worry with that kind of thing has always been that you might lose them because they think you've gone off on a rabbit trail or something. And
Yeah.
but I guess if it's done well, by that point, hopefully you've earned the reader's trust and they are willing to kind of ride with you even when it seems like the wheels are coming off a little.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the key. But now when it comes to like, folding that kind of thing in, I think that frankly happens after the book is written. Like you write the baseline book and then when you go back and you're rereading and rewriting, that's when you're adding those extra layers and the red herrings and the
Yeah.
rabbit trails. But if you're smart enough to do it ahead of time, my hat off to you. But everything clever that appears in my books appeared after I started editing.
I mean, that makes sense though, because you don't do like the plotting and the outlining, right? So I mean, like your process has to sort of be a little bit more like fluid in that way.
Yeah.
But if you're like plotting, then you definitely, I guess it depends on how detailed you outline. But yeah, I mean, at some point, like as you're going through the book, like everything should make sense and tie together in some way.
Yeah. So do you guys read fiction as part of your research for a book?
Sometimes.
I read a ton. I mean, I do try to stick with what I write because my problem is if I start reading in other genres, as much as I like to do it, it makes me want to write in those genres. And like if I write a Western right now, I'm going to get in trouble as much as I'd like to do it. Or like I really want to write a courtroom drama. I would love to sit down and pound one of those out, but I know that's not what the market wants from me right now. So I steer clear of it. But like I just finished the latest John Grisham novel. And like every time I close the cover on one of his books, I'm like, I need to write one of these. And I start digging through my notes of all the ideas that I have along that line, and then I reel myself back in.
Yeah. See, I started a book that was meant to be a John Grisham style story. And then during the writing of it, I've read all these other books. And so it's shifted from time to time to something else. And like the courtroom part of it's gone now. So I don't think that I'm really meant to write a courtroom drama. It's just not really it's not my thing. I'd have to deep dive more.
The courtroom thing for me, like, if I write just a normal straight up thriller, me as the author, I'm basically revealing these little threads here and there and kind of giving the aha moments to the reader. With the courtroom drama, I just think it's the same process, but it's more in your face because now you've got an attorney who's creating those aha moments, presenting a case to the judge and the jury and so you can just, I like it. It just feels like it's just slightly different. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to do it and just get it out of my head.
I'm just too lazy. It's like, that's a level of research to get the details right that I don't think I'm willing to commit, because I just have some guy shouting habeas corpus every few minutes. So
I think I'm just, I don't know. I tend, my ideas, like, they tend not to get, they don't wander. Like, I can read a book and be like, oh, that was a ton of fun, but I don't necessarily like what I would want to recreate out of books I really enjoy outside of my genre would be, maybe a device they use or a structure, but not necessarily the genre itself. Like, I'm very much like, I really enjoy writing sort of fantasy that borders a little bit on science fiction. That's kind of, I like playing in the real world, so it kind of feels real, but it's very still fantastical. And I love reading like thrillers and courtroom dramas, but I've never put one down and been like, man, I want to write one. I mean, maybe with monsters, maybe if the monsters were in the courtroom, I would do it.
You know what really got me? I know this is just totally off topic, but we were talking about The Staircase a couple weeks back. And if you watch the original documentary where they filmed the real people from that case, the attorney, I forget what his first name is, something Rudolph. But the way he speaks, like, he is so perfectly eloquent in every single thing that he communicates. He doesn't stumble. His wording, his phrasing, his mannerisms, everything is as perfect as if he were an actor playing the part of an attorney. And when you watch this, it's a documentary, so they're basically filming him off the cuff. Like, this is, I mean, I'm sure he rehearsed it, which is clear. But like, if you're in a real courtroom, like, things just don't play out that way. And that just showed how good this guy was. And just, it makes me want to write a character like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like that, like taking a character. I think sometimes I've started where it's like, oh, that was fascinating. What would it be like to write a book about this? And then it kind of builds from there. That's always a lot of fun.
Have you guys ever taken a character, not like literally taken this character, but like read a character in a book and decided, hey, I need to write that character doing something else? You can give them a new name, but like, have you ever borrowed characteristics of a character?
I don't think so. I tend to borrow people, like, from real life more than I do characters, because I think, characters are fascinating, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, usually my inspiration comes from people just trying to wrap my head around why people are doing what they're doing in various capacities.
Yeah.
I think the closest I ever came to that is the Morgan Freeman character from Along Came a Spider, and those couple of times where he played Alex Cross. Those really hit home for me. Like, that was perfect casting. I think, perfect, the dialogue, everything just, it was completely in sync. And like, when I started writing my Forum Case series, like, that was my lead detective. But he was a mishmash of Morgan Freeman and Michael Keaton. Like, it was, it wasn't really one person. It was still, I was pulling from different places.
Yeah. Actors are, now that's kind of interesting, because as you said that, I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I've visualized actors from specific films, but sometimes you'll kind of get like a vibe for, like, especially someone who sort of, like, it's very easy to imagine, I don't know, like Robert De Niro as like sort of a mob guy, right? Like, that's pretty easy no matter what he's playing. Or Matt Damon as like a spy or a soldier.
Yeah.
So I think I kind of have done that before, where I might kind of create a character that has a vibe of an actor, but I don't know if that's the character or the person. That's kind of interesting to think about.
I mean, that's one of the things I teach when I have classes, for like mentoring students, to pick an actor or an actress, as your character, and just use them as the baseline, and even their image, whatever. Like, if you take somebody like Ben Affleck, like, the way he walks, the way he talks, the way he moves, doesn't really matter what character he's playing. But if you just use that as the basis for your character, it just gives you a huge jumping off point rather than creating somebody 100% from scratch. And then sooner or later you find your own character voice, I think, in that. And then you just go back and rewrite the first portion of the book to fit.
Yeah. Do you ever use like family members in the stuff, or family history? Do you? Because I know he.
Well, my brother in every book.
I was just sitting here rattling off trying to think. Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually used family members. even people in my real life, like I just had this court case with, dealing with my neighbors, which we've talked about, and we're still waiting on a resolution. So I can't tell you what's going on there. But, like I wrote a book with Patterson, and there was a lot of legal stuff involved in that title. So I kind of roped my attorney in as a first reader, to double check the legal side of it, just to make sure I was getting it right. But that didn't, he wasn't a character. Like, he was basically weighing in because he was a knowledge base. So I don't think I've ever actually done that. It's always been fictional people, or, as close to that as I've gotten is the actors and actress thing I just talked about.
My brother is always asking me to write a book about him. And so I just put his first name, and then it's always a character that dies.
Now, I've done that. My sister is a nurse in one of my books. One of my best friends from high school, I made him a brain surgeon. The guy in real life mows lawns for a living. He's got a landscaping company. So I just thought, but I put their names in there.
The book I'm drafting now doesn't necessarily have, but for my writing group, I needed, because it's sort of like a heist premise. And so you need specific characters, right? Like, you need sort of like the hacker, even though it's not really, like the electronics guy, the mastermind, like you need all these different pieces. So my writing group, I asked them who they wanted to be and what they wanted them to be named. And so that was actually kind of fun, just sort of going from there. But
well, since we don't have Christine, she dropped out. I think she's fed up with us. JD, who do we have coming up next time?
Next week, we've got Kelsia Yu. Kelsia is a Shirley Jackson Award nominee and the author of dozens of short stories that have appeared in magazines such as Clarkesworld, Nightmare, and Fantasy. Her latest novel is called It's Only a Game, a twisty, fast-paced young adult thriller, which releases July 9th.
Sounds like a good one. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.